Welcome to the Comfortable in Chaos Podcast. Strangle your demons and let's go.
Y'all need Jesus!
Dallas packed her suitcase and drove off in the brand new car I bought her. She made leaving me look easy. I wish she'd made it look a little harder. Oh, boys. Y'all know that Alan Jackson song. You've heard me sing rock, but now we're on a little bit of country. And I'm going to add a twist to the song, man. Here it is. Oh, if Dallas was in Colorado Springs. Oh, Lord, if Dallas was in Colorado Springs. Welcome to the Comfortable in Chaos Podcast. I am your host, Eric Hellberg, and you know, we're like Einstein over here. We have no special talents. We are just passionately curious about all things pertaining to men. How in the hell did we get here? And where is it that we want to go? Let's rip out this mic, because we're about to get down, Brown. When we're talking about special talents, ultimately in order to make it through life, we have to grasp onto some things. And as men, we can be deficient in some areas, but it is hard to both see and acknowledge because we believe we may have some special talents. Therefore, we are good there. How could we be bad elsewhere? Okay, so let's fast forward. This show is going to focus on some D's. D is in Delta phonetically. We're going to use some words that begin with D, and we are going to talk about therapy. Have you ever been? Have you ever sought it out? Did you think it was only for losers and people who couldn't cope with their own lives? Or perhaps even the lives of others that they had let intertwine in them so much that they were stumbling? Well, guess what? I certainly did at one time, until I was slapped right in the face with some shit that I had stepped in, and I couldn't get that stench off my shoe. Moreover, you know what I wanted to do? I wanted to make sure there wasn't any of that stuff laying there in the first place anymore. So when I go walking through there, and you know, when I'm working out, I like to work out barefoot in the pasture in the front yard. I wanted to make sure that I didn't have a chance of stepping in it any longer, because these were simply some things I had never been taught. I certainly didn't understand. There were some barriers that I had come up against growing up that certainly put some germinating seeds in my mind that, if properly watered, well, that plant is going to grow. Let's hold on to that thought. Here are the D's, the D words. Let's talk about Let's Spit, Black Buffalo out, Copenhagen straight in. Let's talk about Daystar, huge billion-dollar Christian network. Let's talk about Dallas. Since we're on a country theme, my old neighbor Mark Chestnut had one of his big hits. I'm going through the big D and don't mean Dallas. Well, we've mentioned Dallas. That's actually a point of origin and a point of sustenance. And let's mention Doug Weiss. That's enough D's for right there. Because not to throw shade, but leadership does have implications. If you draw up a plan and or a program in the military, you are responsible for it. Now, you can rely upon others to carry it out. However, my guess is that you probably should have already conducted that operation enough times that people will follow you unquestionably. That's the example we're always looking for in our male leaders, right? Whether it's in the military, whether it's in a corporate setting. And you know what? As Christ calls it, right here in our own home. And we know that these opinions right here, and these are just simply opinions. I would say informed opinions, though, are just that of a fallen man. And we know no matter what we attempt to do, and as men, boy, oh boy, we attempt to do so many things in order to achieve value, define worth, even righteous tasks. But ultimately we are told that they will be hailed as filthy rags in the eyes of the Lord. There's nothing you can do to make yourself a better person in the Lord's eyes. And for that reason, that's why He has given you a very simplistic formula, easier said than done, that if you believe on His Son, amongst other things, salvation, your eternal future is assured. Doesn't mean you're not going to step in the shit here, but it is assured. So how do you manage that? How do you manage that? At the same time, your saving grace, no pun intended, is that you were forgiven. You were absolved, provided you realize that you need to be. You are repentant. And whatever it is that you have done, and if you're going to live this life, one, you never arrive as a pure Christian. You're constantly tweaking that recipe. Maybe you're cooking for a larger group. Hey, you need to minimize something. You add a little water, therefore you have to continue to season. You simply have to live your day-to-day life trying to be better than the next based upon what you are learning. And since I mentioned therapy, unless it comes from the good Lord above, and I do believe, especially now, wholeheartedly, that everything you need for any problem that you may encounter is in that divinely inspired book whereby the Lord's Spirit can open up in front of you. And that is the Bible. And if you are relying upon fallen men and their opinions, you may have a very tough row to hoe because they can't do it for you. You have to experience it, live it, feel it, and adjust accordingly. You will never arrive. It is a lifelong process. And at the end, if you do it that way, that is when you will get the well done, my good and faithful servant. So why did I mention Daystar? Why did I mention Dallas? Why did I mention Doug Weiss? Strap on your seatbelts, man. Let's go. Well, we know that Doug Weiss is a pastor. He is a doctor in psychology. We know that he received those credentials, I believe, at seminary in Dallas. Okay, we know that Daystar TV is actually in Bedford, so we'll call that DFW, a suburb of Dallas-Fort Worth. And we know that Dr. Doug Weiss is the namesake, founder, and I believe still the chief operator of Heart to Heart Counseling Center and Colorado Springs. Remember, I changed the song Dallas? Oh, if Dallas was in Colorado Springs. And brother, they ain't no cookie cutter counseling service. No. They pride themselves on individualization. Okay. And their verbiage, not mine. Our counseling sessions strip your situation down to the core issues. So that would imply the actual issues and get to the foundation of the problems. Get to the foundation. That means the bedrock, right? What everything is laying on. What caused these? Okay. Our licensed counselors help you build a productive modality which allows you to carry the skills you learn forward to even address future problems you are facing. All right, that's good enough for now. Well, I went in summer of 22. The summer actually going on toward the latter part of the summer of 2022. And the reason I went was my wife was unfulfilled simply because she felt like I had not given her enough spiritual, emotional, and physical intimacy. Now you're saying, what in God's green earth is that? What are all three of those things? Well, it certainly needs to be understood, the breadth and scope. And if a relationship has been lacking, especially a marriage in that department, well, there's some work that needs to be done. So I certainly needed to become aware of where that had been neglected, how to do it better, and in order to go forward successfully in marriage, I needed to have a template and some consistency whereby I could provide that and it could then mitigate the hurt that had ensued from a lack of it. Okay, and certainly, in my belief, I don't know how the Lord works. He works in mysterious ways. None of us really know. But I felt like there needed to be an atoning. There certainly needed to be a repentant heart. And all these things started to be worked on. What I will tell you, though, was had I found out before ever going that namesake, Dr. Doug Weiss, was already divorced, but still providing therapy and counseling in those vaunted halls all during that time while we were there. And not only that, everyone associated with that program also knew, but not a word was said. In fact, the man's wife, I believe still to this day, remains the office manager. Could simply be one of those good business relationships, right? But we weren't told one iota in getting this booked. It was never ever mentioned. So that leaves room for pause because it was business as usual over there. And let me tell you, it is quite a big business. In fact, when you walk in there day one for this, what they call an intensive, whereby you are going to go into counseling, Sometimes for 3 days, sometimes for 5 days. I chose the 5-day option. The moment you get in there, you are handed a clipboard of paperwork to begin filling out. And did you know as soon as you sit down to start filling that out, they come to extract payment from you. Now, this isn't cheap. Granted, you're in Colorado Springs, so if you're not from there, you have traveled there. You're going to have lodging. You're going to have meals. You're going to have what these counseling sessions cost you. And that was $8,000, or maybe $8,500 in and of itself. So all told, you're going to be there for a week. Now, my wife and I decided, let's have some fun with it. We know we're going to go plug away and do some hard work probably, but let's turn it into a vacation. So we got there early, a few days early, and tooled around Colorado, all that good stuff, enjoyed one another. But all told, you're putting out some serious ducks. But what if you get there day one, and then you find out what I just detailed to you? Would you continue? What if you had known about it beforehand? Would you be reticent to go book that? And especially if you knew the circumstances of how it had all transpired. So we know that Doug Weiss is very prodigious. How he maintained a marriage, I have no idea. Because in the course of attempting to save mine, I willingly, forthwith, horrible word, I was willing to forego my whole existence because it meant that much to me. Had that much love in my heart. I wanted this to work. I didn't want it to fail. So, if work or a tendency to work prodigiously was in your background, well, obviously you want to show your spouse that is no longer going to infringe. If you have hobbies, you have friends, you have any of those things that could get in the way, they're done. You have one focus, one mission. Now, Doug Weiss let me tell you about this cat. He's writing books. He's traveling back and forth to Bedford, Texas. And this has been going on for a long time because I've watched Daystar from time to time, even before I ever went here for therapy. And as far as I can tell, there's interviews going back with Doug Weiss 13 years ago from the Daystar network. All right. In fact, we know that the namesakes of the Daystar network, that multi-billion-dollar Christian empire, were Marcus Lamb and Joni Lamb, very good friends of Doug and his wife. Well, that's interesting, because when we went to therapy, I was told you really need to be careful in all this running around as couples. It typically doesn't go well. But yet that relationship had endured. I mean, friends are friends, right? Well, guess what? Doug had copious amounts of interviews on the Daystar network. He was very well received. In fact, I'd watched some of his information before we ever went to Heart Counseling Center. And looking back over some of these things, hell, I remember when there was a scandal in the ministry at Daystar. You know what transpired there? Evidently, Marcus Lamb had some type of transgression. And then him and his wife, Joni, were being the subjects of attempted blackmail at this time, and that was many, many years ago. It was like 7 point something million, and they were going to release this story. So they went out on a damage control PR campaign. Think about Christian broadcasting. Lots of PR, right? After all, cash is king. So much for helping the blind to see. Oh, spreading the gospel of Christ. If you pay for it, we'll certainly help you spread it. This is the same network that I didn't even realize hosts Creflo Dollar. Are you kidding me, man? You've heard me mention Olstein and all these yahoos. They have Creflo Dollar on there. Joseph Prince. Oh, and don't forget about Joyce Meyer. I mean, we could solve these migrant problems just by bringing a whole cohort across the border at Eagle Pass. And man, we could house a bunch of them at Joyce Meyer, Creflo Dollar, and Joseph Prince's house. You know what? We could even house them at Joni Lamb's house. Maybe Joni and Doug's house now. Because Joni already had a really nice house in the DFW Metroplex. But after Marcus Lamb died, and of course Doug was very much involved in these interviews going back and forth at Daystar on a variety of issues. Well, when Marcus Lamb died of COVID at the end of 21, my God, by the time the beginning of 2022 had started, despite having a really nice house, she bought a piece of property and broke ground in Colleyville, a neighborhood adjacent to these other areas I mentioned by Daystar, so she could build a new, more formal and 10,000 square foot home. Who was that for? Well, we know by that time, it looks like Doug Weiss, the owner of Heart to Heart Counseling Center, and Joni Lamb of Daystar had a burgeoning relationship in the mix. My goodness. Because according from the inside out, and this is one of his own counselors, because I was in one of their groups, they told me that the divorce was final in spring of 2022. So we would continue on business as usual. And think how many people went through this process, these intensives, this treatment, various group counseling sessions, various individual counseling sessions, because Heart to Heart is always willing to, of course, part of the protocol is you have to get into a group counseling session. If need be, whoever facilitated your intensive, you can utilize them, pay them. And if you're having any other type of trouble beyond your intensive and sometimes going back to your actual therapist who you pay, and also in addition to the protocol whereby you become in a group setting. And if you're a lady, you have calls and keep your debit card on file monthly with a group of ladies. You do the same if you're a man. And if you encounter anything in and above that, well, then you can have individualized counseling sessions and have another payment that you can do with another counselor. I mean, they have a whole system there. But why would they have a whole system unless this is not prohibitively difficult in many, many cases? But despite all that, you already had a burgeoning romance, and one that quickly ran amok. So one husband dies, there's an opportunity, and now this man, Mr. Dr. Douglas Weiss is going to leave his wife, who runs, at least administratively. He takes care of the field work, right? Head of counseling, the intensives, whatnot. Heart-to-heart counseling center whereby she's still in the employ, and I believe some of his children. But you have to see, I mentioned the word prodigious. He conducts intensives. He does interviews in another locale. He'll speak at churches. He goes to different men's groups, approaches them, counsels them. He writes books. How in the world does this leader of this counseling center get so much done and still look after the day-to-day aspects of his marriage? Well, my guess is he was not. And when you're as good at marketing as Doug Weiss is, and as good at marketing as Daystar is, in fact, people were vehemently sickened by this arrangement. Actual Christians, and not people that had even attended Heart-to-Heart Counseling Center. It didn't pass the smell test. They couldn't believe it. And in fact, when some people went to post videos and or to discuss it further, right? That's what this medium is for. They were curtailed, even though it was all public data. Public data because Doug Weiss and Joni Lamb posted it all. They were hit with copyright infringement materials, told they couldn't show these images, but yet Daystar ran a whole hour-plus episode of their new wedding once they had made it through the melee. And I guess they feel like they had all hunkered down and weathered the appropriate storm of scrutiny. Oh, yeah. Lovely wedding. I don't see the need for all that. I don't know that most couples, when they get married, even on their first marriage, will publicly broadcast for millions to see and then decry their untold happiness. But this was wedding number 2 for each of them. And it all happened so quickly after the demise of each of their first unions. What I will tell you is that anyone that is that adept at making themselves look good and or convincing people would also be just as adept of telling you how much pure success comes out of that heart-to-heart treatment center, whereby the goal is to alleviate divorce, make marriages better, and give people a fresh start. But you don't hear much of that. Now, you will find a lot of negative information about the experience. But it's a bit aged. It's a bit aged because anything more current has been scrubbed. Oh yeah, when you have $1 billion network and the best IT people at your behest, kind of like you'd hear Trump saying, fake news. Well, you can craft the image that you really want to have portrayed, can't you? Because someone like Doug Weiss, if he had the opportunity to tout his success, oh, he would certainly tout it. I mean, after all, he's a bodybuilder, right? Forgot to add that. How can you have personal trainers take the time to get yourself so bronzed, have a fresh fade haircut all the time, and then when you come out of a world of sexual impurity, you're going to parade around in short shorts, whether or not there's women there, I don't know, certainly in the audience watching you, and put yourself on display. It's not simply good enough to be functionally fit for the life ahead of you, but you want people to look at what you believe are your muscles and dance around and even endorse products. And it's a very odd way to do things. And this is the same man that I heard in an interview specify. And you always know that you need to be careful when you hear about someone saying, I gave God an ultimatum. Really? You, Doug Weiss, a puny man, even with your muscles, Doug, a puny man, gave God an ultimatum? Oh, yeah. He said he gave him 30 days. 30 days by which, if he didn't change his life, that being the Lord, the creator of the universe, that he would kill himself. Well, evidently, the Lord complied with what Doug Weiss told him he really needed to pay attention to. Never mind everything going on this orb we call Earth, but Doug's needs were really important. Now, is God capable? Certainly. So he looked after Doug. We know that he looked after Doug. And we also know that one of our protocols at Heart to Heart were what we called the 5 C's. And in the 5 C's, there were some daily feelings and or affirmations whereby you provide these or go through these with your spouse. And Doug was so successful at it that he also said that no matter where in the world he was, now remember, he's a very focused man. He travels all over nonstop, working for things that allow him to feel important and to find worth. All he had to do was pick up the phone and call his wife. Most people know her name, and they were good. Can you imagine, man, if that's all we had to do? Is take 5 minutes each day, tell our wife 2 feelings that we were experiencing, and then give each other an affirmation. Boy, oh boy, marriage sure would be easy. But for Doug, apparently it was not. My goodness, I tell you, that makes me want to sing this song. I ain't much on Casanova. Me and Romeo ain't never been friends, oh Lord. Because Doug is smooth, man. Oh, I'm telling you. Just ask him. He's really, really smooth. He's smooth with the ladies now. Come on. I already had him another wife lined up. Maybe he just saw the greener pastures, right? $1 billion Daystar network. He has a new show on there too, by the way. Believe there's been an exodus. I don't know who's actually related to who on the Lamb side, the Weiss side. But everyone has shows now. It's business as usual. There's money to be made. Tell you what, Doug's actually so smooth. You're in this setting whereby men are only supposed to counsel men. Women are only supposed to counsel women. In fact, it's told to you that way. And Doug was such a conscientious individual. Did you know he visited my wife on 4 separate occasions while we were there during the week? Now, I could get one. You know, how you coming along, ma'am? Excuse me. The second one, oh, we just happened to be walking down the hall together. Good to see you again. Everything going well for you? But number 3 and number 4? I mean, come on, Doug. Really? You just left one. You'd already married another. Leave these doggone girls alone, man. We know you need to be at the top of your game at all times, but that's a little bit antithetical to the message that's being espoused in your program. Same with all this voluminous amount of interchange and work that you're constantly engaged in. Because your program is a full-time job in and of itself. And that's why most men falter. And we're going to touch upon that. Because their statistics, should they truly be shown, are not good. And you're going to say, like, how can you say that, Eric? Because I was in the middle of it. I've seen who succeeds and who fails. I'm a graduate of the program. Out of all the men I encountered, I'm the only one. All the people I went through it with, their marriages ended. They never had a chance. A lot of it may be their own fault, but not all of it. Because you can't take a tiger and treat it like a pussycat. And you can't take a pussycat and treat it like a tiger. There's some similar traits. You can look at them and say, oh, I can see they're part of that feline family, but they're not the same. And if you are truly concerned about individualization and modalities, as you specify, that lead to actual life-changing improvements, then you would care enough to know that not everyone comes from the same place. Not everyone has the same life. Not everyone has the same things to contend with. So you can't just simply run the same play in football and expect for the team to be successful. But you have their money, right? As soon as they got in and started filling out things on that clipboard, you had their money. You are good at that, Doug. Now we know what ended up happening since we started off talking about D, Delta, phonetic, right? To use some more Ds, there's another famous pastor in the DFW Metroplex. He's also on Daystar. He's a guy I used to listen to quite a bit and admired. Well, his name is Jimmy Evans, XO Marriage. You know what he ended up as? We're using D words, decrying. That Mr. Doug Weiss had become embattled in a period of misery over many, many years and had withered away as an individual and as a man. Therefore, he sanctified and approved and thought that God would also do the same of he and his wife's divorce, because he just simply was not the same man that he was before, despite, sounds like, chasing everything that his heart desires. And we know that the heart is deceptively wicked. Until next time on the Comfortable in Chaos podcast, let's go ahead and make this another series. We will go back to Heart, episode 2. I thank you, man.